Good morning, Scott here, known as Cantaloupe to some online, and I'm bringing a video to you on a subject that's interesting to me. It might be of interest to you or someone you know, and I want to talk about prisons. Prisons, U.S. prisons in particular. Maybe you're familiar, maybe you've been to prison, or you know somebody who's been to prison. I personally have not been to prison. I don't plan on going, but I have been to jail, and I know a little bit about it. And I also know a little bit about the U.S. justice system and the U.S. correction system, because I've spent a long time thinking about it and learning about it the hard way. So I want to share a couple of insights and observations regarding the U.S. prison system. In particular, the idea that it is a deterrent. Now, maybe you've heard of this word, deterrent. That is, the idea that if you should do something against the law, if you break the law and you are convicted, you are punished, right? There's a punishment, and it is to supposedly deter people from considering such things, such activities and choices. However, it turns out that the vast majority of people who you find in prison don't have the wherewithal or the foresight to, be deterrable, if you will. So it's a flawed concept. I mean, the idea looks good on paper. Many times things look good on paper, they say, but it just doesn't pan out. And if you really examine it, this isn't going to be a long video, but if you examine the opportunity of punishment in corrections, in U.S. corrections, you see that there's a substitute happening here, a substitute that used to be handled by something called exile. Exile, that's being banned or kicked out of a place, of a city or a whole country. We call it deportation now, and it's usually reserved for people who are supposedly from other places to begin with, but this used to be a much bigger thing. The same idea, but not just for illegal immigrants, but for criminals, in fact, of all kinds, who could not be supported in the community anymore. Exile is a very natural and effective means of corrections, turns out. And this is the point, prison systems are designed to substitute for exile. And why do we not exile people anymore? Well, if you think about it, it's because there are, borders, there are property lines, there are nations that wouldn't appreciate us offloading our criminals to their territory. And this is a huge problem. So if we can't exile people anymore in good conscience or in good politics with other countries, what do we do with the criminals that used to be kicked out of places? Well, we kick them in, right? So this is kind of just a natural next step. We say, well, we can't export these people anymore like we used to when property was point-based, as tribal, migratory tribes and nomadic type people who would maybe have a council or a king, and a decision would be made to exile somebody. Now we kick them into prison, right? It's the same idea. They're out of the community by way of containing them, compartmentalizing them, but it's different. Now here's the problem. As a substitute, incarceration does not perform the same service as exile. In particular, the people who are exiled have an opportunity to grow, to learn, to adapt, and to mature in a natural, albeit harder, place. Whereas prisoners just convalesce. They convalesce at the cost of the community, even. So you're compounding the problem by making it impossible for them to learn and grow in a natural setting, and you're also paying for it with the same community who was wronged by these supposed criminals. So I assert, in final conclusion, at just before 4 minutes, that the entire prison system is misguided. Not only is it expensive, but it's a poor substitute for what used to be effective. And the real problem, if you think about it, isn't so much corrections or opportunities in our justice system. I mean, there are opportunities, don't get me wrong, that's a digression to a different video, but really it's about property lines, it's about borders, and it's about the codification of hard political borders between countries and states and regions, whereby you can no longer export individuals without some kind of complaint, because that's private property over there, somebody else's land, their jurisdiction, right? You don't do that, but you're supposed to be able to. So in actual final conclusion, where did all of these property lines come from? And why is it so common and expected for there to be hard property lines that create so many problems for people? Well, you can thank the British, in this country anyway. You can thank the British because they brought this idea with them, as opposed to the system that was in use beforehand with the Native Americans, for example, who had a point-based property system. That is, you had your location where you live as a person or a family, and a buffer zone around it, probably, and you could just add more points. If you had more people, you just add a few more points, and it's not a big deal. And you can deport people, you can exile people as needed without any kind of problems whatsoever. But when you have property lines, hard lines that are not just expressed by a fence, but that are in a database nowadays, and it is indisputable, it's on public record, you run out of area very quickly. Here, it's just a geometric problem. You can't add more area to an area, but you can add more points to an area. It's a problem of dimensions. So again, back to the problem is the British introduced this idea of hard property lines, exhaustively using up all the space in an area, people owning perimeters instead of points. And it's an expansion of this earlier idea, but it creates a huge number of problems. So a possible solution would be to have guidelines instead of hard legal property lines where somebody's going to say, hey, if you move 1 more inch, you're on my property. Legally, you are. Okay, so yes, but there has to be a grace period, a buffer zone, some kind of gray area in between, just so that people can breathe, just so that we can have systems that work in good faith. It's very important. Now, you can still have complaints, even without hard property lines. This is kind of a wild idea. You can still have complaints, and you can have legal recourse, because there isn't always going to be a problem. And in fact, if you think about it, it gives people a reason to think harder about where they are, how they're behaving, and they have less entitlement, right? So I know if I go 1 more inch, I can't do what I'm doing because I'll be on Joe Bob's land, for example. But if that line were ambiguous just a little bit, if you know that you're approaching Joe Bob's point of residence, you might start to think about what you're doing and how you're doing it more than you would otherwise. It's just an interesting feature of how things used to be and how they probably should be. And if Joe Bob has a complaint and it's substantiated, you can have the same legal recourse in a court of law. It's not a huge deal having soft property lines versus hard property lines, including national borders, state borders, and such, so that if for no other reason you can deport or exile people as needed and actually have them learn and grow from hard experience versus convalescing and learning how to be hardened criminals in the prison system. It's kind of a big idea. I just wanted to get it out there. I'm at 8 minutes. If you appreciate this or don't appreciate it, either way, reach out down below with questions or comments. Thank you.